All right. Welcome to anyone who just came in. We are pretty much getting to a critical mass now. So so that we stay on time, I'm going to get started now. Again, if you're not already on mute when you come in, if you can just mute yourself, that would be great. And I'm about to share my screen and get us started. All right. Welcome everyone to the first of our winter convening sessions for building innovation for equitable child care. This session is focusing on funding sources for development and operations. Thank you all for joining today and for participating in this program during the past year. We are so excited to be working with all of you and to see how your projects develop. If you could please stay on mute during the first portion of the session, that would be great. And later during the open Q&A session, you can feel free to unmute and freely interact with speakers and other participants. You're encouraged to leave your video on throughout the session, but particularly during the Q&A. And for those of you that did not hear, we will be recording this session today. So I believe many of you know us, but today's session was organized by the LISC National Child Care and Early Learning Team, which includes Cindy Larson as National Director, Bevan Parker-Turca as a Senior Program Officer, and myself, Cecile De Laurentiis, as Assistant Program Officer. For other participants in today's call, please just drop a quick introduction in the chat. Your name, organization, and location would be great. I will now briefly introduce our expert panel for today, which includes our own Cindy Larson, Bree Horwitz, and Joe Garlick. Speakers, can you give a quick introduction and name your organization and your role there? Let's start with Bree, and then after that we'll move on to Joe and Cindy.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. I'm Bree Horwitz. I'm the Senior Project Manager with the Children's Investment Fund. We are a CDFI in Massachusetts that provides training, lending, and technical assistance to nonprofit center-based early education and out-of-school time programs in Massachusetts. I'll pass on to Joe.
Joe, you're muted.
Hi, Joe Garlick with NeighborWorks, Blackstone River Valley. We're a nonprofit CDC. We're based in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, and we work in the northern part of the state.
And I will go last. Cindy Larson, I met many of you at our last convening. I'm so happy to be here with you again. I have the privilege of heading up our childcare and early learning work nationally here at LISC, working with fabulous partners like all of you across the country. And I'm assuming, Cecile, that since I'm sort of first up on the agenda today, you'd like me to just keep talking. Is that correct? But Cecile is our master of ceremonies or mistress of ceremonies. I'm not.
I'm actually going to just quickly go over the agenda, and then I will kick it back to you, Cindy. Thanks for checking on that. So now from this introduction section, we are going to then move into a presentation on child care facilities development and financing by Cindy and Bree, which will just be a pretty quick overview, and that'll be followed by a project spotlight from Joe. Then we'll move into a panel discussion with our three speakers, and we want to leave as much time as possible for an open Q&A period where you can all bring your questions and workshop your project pain points and challenges. If you have questions during the presentation, if you could just drop them in the chat or save them for the open session so that we have enough time for our discussion, that would be wonderful. Bevan will be monitoring the chat and we'll be able to lift up questions later if you do drop them in there. And now I will hand it back to Cindy to do our initial presentation. And if you could prompt me to change the slide if needed, that would be amazing.
Absolutely. You can actually jump right over to the next one right now while I'm talking. So, you know, our intro session here, you all received I don't want to call it homework because I would not have been happy if I had received homework, but you received some pre-reading assignments that you may or may not have done. And in this initial few minutes, what I'm hoping to do is entice you enough to either read through that or go back to it again, because there's really lots of rich information there that we hope can help you as you think about financing and really getting these projects that you're all working on over the finish line. I'm going to be running through these slides with Bree backing me up on this, and we are very unscripted here. So Bree, feel free to just chime in at will as we go through this. You know, as we take a look at these phases, I know that all of you that are on today are at different project phases, but most of you are bumping up against some of the pain point of fundraising. And I got recruited by my team to join you here today. I thought about why they recruited me because there's so many experts on this topic, but I think part of it is that they needed someone to just deliver a really honest message, which is this is really, really hard work, and there is no exact perfect linear pathway to financing these projects. This is probably one of the most challenging types of development that happens, and just like childcare looks so different in so many ways, so do the financial capital stacks that come together to get these projects done. So I'm going to talk to you today about some of the ways that you can approach this, and then we'll dig in a little bit more on the specifics of what both Bree and Joe have seen in markets. But, you know, we thought it was important to talk about all of the phases because the reality is you need to be thinking about money at all of these phases. So, you know, wherever you are in the development process, it's important to understand these projects are often not fast. They do need to sort of go through all the stages, and you are going to need to be thinking about how to bring resources in at all of the different stages. If you want to click ahead, Cecile. And Bree, please do feel free to chime in at any time. I know Bree has a whole section, but she also comes to us with a wealth of information. So I want to make sure that you hear from her as well. Yeah, I think if I were only going to do one slide, this would have been the one that I kept because it's so incredibly important that you really think about two things. What is the vision for your project and how are you articulating that vision? So, you know, for all of you, your vision is that you're going to get a child care early learning center developed either on its own, part of a project. You're either the provider or the developer. But the vision is so much more than that, and really fleshing that out and thinking about how you articulate that is essential. So as part of doing this project, are you also revitalizing an important part of a neighborhood? Are you also providing a community hub for families to gather? Are you taking children from a space that right now may not be safe and healthy and helping get them into one that is, so that their outcomes overall can be better? So weaving all of that in and talking about it as so much more than a real estate project is going to be essential to getting champions on board with you. And then thinking about who your champions are going to be. They may not be the same people who have been the longstanding champions of your program overall. So we will talk about both capital budgets and operating budgets, but it's oftentimes folks with different backgrounds that can really lean in on those different types of fundraising asks. Capital fundraising is a very specific thing. There are oftentimes unique funders that are interested in that. And there are oftentimes unique champions that are willing to be involved in a project that feels like it has an end date. So some of your supporters that feel like they may be signing on for the long haul may not be the same people as folks that are willing to commit to help your organization for a year or two with a major capital campaign where they feel like they can make a big impact, but then maybe be done after a couple of years. So really think about who is in your circle, who's in your board members' circle, who are parents currently, who are past parents, others. And Bree, I know you've had a ton of experience helping providers fundraise, so I don't know if you want to say anything at this point just about partners and how you think about how to get those project champions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So first off, you have to think creatively about the stakeholders, and those are everybody, every individual, every institution, every agency that will be impacted by your project. And you need to convince these folks that your project is a great idea. So that includes beyond your board, your staff, your families, the parents. It includes the abutters. It includes the transportation company, your elected officials, basically everybody that you need to be able to sell your vision to. And as Cindy mentioned, the vision is key. That's the first thing that you should be thinking about and keeping foremost. Why are you doing this? This is a very big endeavor and it impacts everybody within your organization. So I would say as simple as I can, the vision is just what is the problem you're trying to solve through this project? What are the children, the staff, and the families that your program serves need? Do you need to expand your program? Do you need to make more income? What are the physical limitations of the current space you're in? What's working, what's not? And you need to ensure that these questions, and they may evolve, as you continue through the project, but you need to make sure that this vision is first and foremost on everybody's minds, because you're going to need a lot of buy-in from a lot of individuals to carry the momentum, not just around fundraising, but around permitting and approvals and visioning and the support for your organization.
Thanks, Bree.
Cindy?
Yeah. So in the tools and the materials that we sent you ahead, there are some great resources for thinking about how to put together your capital budget. I'm going to just pause for a minute on this slide to say the main thing that I need to tell you. So, go to those resources, use those tools, make a solid capital budget. I think if I had to talk about the biggest mistake I've seen people make, and I'll tell you about the mistake because I don't want to see any of you make it, is understating costs. So it's important to be honest about what your costs are and to know what your fundraising goal is. Better that you have a fundraising goal that ends up being higher than what you need, and now you've got some building reserves set aside, than that you do all of this work and come up just a little bit short. So plan carefully, plan thoroughly, and really think about all of the costs and all of the things you're going to need to make this building a reality.
And I will say with that as well, actually, it feeds very much into the next slide as well, pre-construction funding. Just as you are envisioning your project, and really before you ever put a shovel in the ground, you'll be hiring experts, development team members that might be external consultants or folks within your own organization to determine what the early expenses are in the project. And that is all your fact finding, which will lead you to answers as to whether you renovate your existing space or find a new one. Do you relocate? How big do you go? How many classrooms do you add? All of those factors are solved by the money and the planning that you do in the pre-development phase. And so that is the point where I can't stress enough, it's really important to spend the money in the right ways. So by hiring the right experts to do the right kinds of assessments and testing to avoid additional unforeseen costs later on. And Cindy?
Great point. Yeah. I would click ahead, Cecile, because I would just say exactly what Bree said.
Oh, sorry.
Plan these, plan these projects well. It is a downfall of not doing that, and it will come back to bite you with extra costs later if you don't spend the money up front, for sure. So just thinking about some of the development sources, I don't know that I have anything new or cutting edge here, but what I think is really the important point is that it's very rare. I actually have never seen, I've been doing this work for well over 2 decades. I've never seen a project that had just one funding source. It comes from a lot of different places and it takes a lot of creativity. Organizational assets or business assets can be an important source of that. I realize that that's not always a reality, but when we look back at projects and projects that have worked, the reality is most organizations have come with at least some form of assets to put towards the project in some way. There are grants and charitable contributions, and we can dig in a little bit more on what those kinds of sources are. And honestly, loans are a big piece of these projects as well in many, many cases. Next slide. So, in the grant piece of it, public sector grants can be an important piece of this. And when I say public sector grants, it's really, really critical that you think about public in a lot of different ways. So you have federal sources. There is no dedicated source of federal funding for early childhood facilities currently, but there are federal grant sources for buildings and community development projects that may be applicable to the project that you're working on. There are also in many states some individual state funding sources, perhaps not through the child care division, but sometimes through economic development or other places. And many municipalities and counties have funding sources. So it's important to talk to a lot of people, going back to the making sure you have the right champions who are going to know the people to ask questions of. Land can also be, land is not dollars, but if you can get contributions of land or buildings towards projects, that can obviously be really impactful to the overall bottom line, assuming that it's land or buildings that you want and that makes sense for the project, of course. And then foundations. There are resources in the guides that we sent out that take you to places where you can research foundations. There is an early childhood funders collaborative. It has a website. We provide the information to that. We'll provide the link again to you. Actually, I think Bevan just put it in the chat. So search for those folks in the area that may be interested in your project. What I would say about foundations is there are oftentimes different foundations interested in capital than in programming, but even those folks interested in early childhood programming may have relationships or good contacts that they can connect you to. So it's well worth the outreach, the talking to people. Don't just stop at the website where it shows eligibility, really try to get to someone and have a conversation. And then loans. And I know, Bree's going to highlight a little bit more on public sources and loans, as well as other things in particular when she talks about some of the great work that CDAC has done in Massachusetts. Loans are a miserable thing that no one wants to talk about. I know that because I've been talking to people about loans for a really long time, and it's never the favorite subject, but I actually believe that loans are an incredibly powerful tool in these community development projects. And they are often the thing that get these projects over the finish line. And if these are good loans that are structured right with the flexibility and the terms that you need, then I would not shy away from adding that as a source of capital to your projects, because, better to do that than to be 50% of the way there and not get the project built. So there are folks providing loans at much better terms. These do tend to look very different market to market. You will often hear folks talking to you about what you need to come to the table with as a borrower, what folks are going to be looking for from credit, but also, you need to be a good consumer and make sure that you're finding a product that works for you. So, again, all of this information, I don't want to necessarily reread to you things that are in the resources we sent, but really dig in and understand when you're meeting with lenders, the kinds of questions they're going to have, the kind of things they're going to want to know about, but also you go with your list of questions for them and make sure that they're able to provide a product that makes sense.
And I will just say, as a lender, what's most important to us is the diversity of and opportunities for operating dollars. I mean, we work exclusively with nonprofit childcare providers, so we know the financials of childcare operations. And because so many of our projects are in partnership with housing or community centers and other public or educational uses, we see how that impacts the operating budget as well. And I would just say that in terms of readiness, financial readiness is key as you are planning your project, and really to look at not just what you can afford and how long, and to certainly bring your board members on board with taking on debt. It's not just a four-letter word, but also to look at your organizational health and your financial health, and specifically your management letters issued by your auditors if you do audited statements every year. So looking for issues of non-compliance and instances of default, and being able to explain that to your lenders.
Just a quick time check. We have about a few more minutes to move through the rest of these slides, Cindy and Bree. So just so that you know.
Okay. So as Bree was talking about, having budget projections is going to be really important to the project. So there's two forms of budgets that you should be thinking about. You should be thinking about your capital budget, which we've talked about. but also the operating budget. And I know a number of the folks that have joined us today are actually more on the development side. So it's really important that you be working with the provider themselves to make sure that there's a solid set of multi-year operating projections, so that there's an understanding of what can the provider support and pay for in that space, whether that's paying rent to you as a developer, whether that's helping the space qualify for a loan. It's equally important that there be time spent on these operating projections as on the capital budget. So they're very different budgets, but they work really sort of harmoniously together. And again, there's tools to build these budgets out in the materials that we sent. And yeah, I was going to say we can actually skip over that. That's just showing that there's examples there and the page of the pre-reading that it's on. So take a look, dig in on those, utilize those. Also, and we're showing this, but it was sent to you. We'll send it to you again. We touched really high level on some of these resources. These are all live links that will take you to actual resources where you can dig in and see if this might be a good fit for your project. This is certainly not an exhaustive list, but it is a good list. And most of you should find at least one or two things from this, I would say. And with that, I'm going to actually turn it over to Bree to talk just a little bit more about the fantastic work that's happening in Massachusetts that I think all of you can learn quite a bit from.
Thank you so much, Cindy. So we and our affiliate agency, CDAC, which is an affordable housing agency, have partnered with the Mass Development of Early Education and Care to administer a capital grant program. In addition to the work we do to provide pre-development construction and other loans in Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, we have the Early Education Out of School Time Capital Fund, EEOST, which I'll refer to as the Capital Fund, which was created in 2013 by the Massachusetts legislature. This grant program provides grants of up to $1 million for major capital projects across the state. And in 2020, we restructured the program to allow for smaller grants between $100,000 and $250,000 to address COVID-related emergency needs. This is so in the first 7 years of the program, we were able to fund 73 projects through the first $39 million of the EEOST funding, which created 1,200 new slots and impacted 9,000 children, 80% of whom were from families with low income. And we've leveraged over $234 million in additional public and private investment. We just issued our building quality report, which is available on our website, and LISC will send out a link after this session, which outlines the capital fund and profiles grantees that have received this. So this is a chart that shows on average, this capital fund comprises about a third of a project's total funding sources. Most typically, we would see debt and fundraising comprising the other 2/3, in addition to equity from the organization and other smaller opportunities like CDBG and other public sources. Essentially, these state grants make these projects possible. Without them in Massachusetts, providers would need to take on additional debt or scale back their projects, which would have impacted ultimately the quality of the improvements that were funded through this grant. Next page, please. So this is a section of the report. It's really hard to read, but you can read the whole thing on our website. That summarizes the result of an evaluation study we did in collaboration with an external research team. So this was an experimental study that looked at the first 16 grantees that were funded through the EEOST Capital Fund. We conducted observational assessments before and after the improvements, interviewed the directors and surveyed staff. These projects varied. There was one that was just an acquisition of an existing building with no construction. Another renovated a playground. Whereas others radically renovated their existing spaces or built entirely new structures. We use the physical environments for early learning, the PEAL instrument tool, to assess quality, as well as other environmental rating scales to see what we could find. But here are a few highlights. All the 16 projects were completed successfully without a single lost day of service to families and children, which is pretty incredible. That they could provide a continuity of care despite undertaking a large capital project. We saw increased quality in the facilities. Staff reported better learning opportunities for the children and that the improvements had a positive impact on their own health and well-being. And staff reported a 20-minute increase in daily physical activity for the children, which is attributed to improved outdoor play spaces with age-appropriate structures, the creation and improvement of indoor gross motor spaces, and new efficiencies in the building layout that reduced the time spent transitioning between activities from before the capital improvements were made, which is pretty noteworthy. Most organizations utilize these grants to add sinks in classrooms, add restrooms, improve gross motor and other playing opportunities. And I'm happy to talk after this to anyone that would like to find out more about this EUST capital project. Next slide, please. We've seen several projects co-locate affordable housing and childcare like this organization in New Bedford that consolidated its programming into one location. So the 8 single room occupancy units for women escaping domestic violence stand alongside an after-school program for up to 52 children. We have other examples, including partnering with a Boston public housing development with a community center and large play space that will be renovated alongside affordable housing. Just a few thoughts on co-location is that I would suggest you retain design expertise to ensure that the uses within the building are segregated for security and traffic purposes so that children have a direct entrance into the building and direct great access to outdoor play areas, and that there's space to integrate parent and bus pickup and drop off with other uses at the site. That can be really complicated if you're going from one entrance for all these people that have different uses within the building to co-locating childcare, which is separate from your other activities. Next slide, please. So in terms of measuring demand, overall, there have been 149 applications for the 73 grants awarded. In terms of a dollar amount, that's $68 million in requests, with only $39 million available from the bond. And a few notes, you'll see that in fiscal year 21, there was a big jump in demand. And so that reflected the interest in the modified round, where we have the smaller grants between $100,000 and $250,000. And that is what we are going to do this year as well. So that's for health and safety improvements. Many HVAC projects, especially over the past year. These figures also include repeat applicants for the larger grants. Many organizations applied 2 to 3 times before becoming successful in their application, and are in the intervening years, my organization worked with these providers to offer trainings and technical assistance that help them strengthen their projects. So the number of grants we can award every year is essentially dependent on how much the governor allocates for this fund per year in the capital bond. In fiscal year 21, there was additional funding available to supplement the program. So we were able to award more grants, 7.5 million, as opposed to the typical 3.6 million. But in terms of marketing this, it's narrow because the eligibility for the project for applicants is limited to nonprofit organizations that serve a high percentage of low-income children. But we do have relationships with partner organizations like Mass Head Start Association, the Association of YMCAs, and statewide trade associations to market our program over the years. And our limitation in terms of serving nonprofit organizations with a high percentage of low-income slots is defined statutorily by the legislation that created our bond. So with that, I'm going to actually introduce Joe, who is the Executive Director of NeighborWorks of Blackstone Valley, and he will share the development story of the Hope Street Family Center in Woonsocket.
Okay, so I'll move through my slides fairly rapidly. I know we're a little behind, but this was our first community facility project in the neighborhood that we've worked in for about 30 years at this point. This was a historic school that had been vacant about 30 years. If you want to flip to the next slide, Cecile. Yeah, that was what the neighbors looked at for 30 years. In order to get site control, we had a little bit of competition from a private developer and the city. They wanted condos here, but you know, with a little organizing work, with our neighbors. We secured site control. It was a messy title with lots of complications. There was a bank failure, environmental contamination. You know, the sites that only CDCs could love. This was one of those. Yeah, you can kind of keep flipping there, Cecile. It's a grand building, beautiful brick building. The whole neighborhood, anyone who grew up in that area had gone to that elementary school. So it was a well-loved institution. We knew that we were going to use it for daycare. It was really important. There was a tremendous need in the neighborhood. This was the side of town where folks had to take a bus to get to the childcare on the other side of town, which took an hour. So it was very inconvenient. This was really located in an ideal place for childcare. We had identified an initial partner. It was a for-profit childcare business. They kind of fell off, because it was important to us that it be, achieve some neighborhood goals also, and they kind of decided not worth the effort. We were lucky we had another neighborhood partner who actually ran a lot of youth programming, and were deciding to go into the childcare sector as part of their sort of earned income organizational growth strategy. It worked out really well, but they were pretty green, as were we. We've done a lot of housing. This, as I said, was our first community facility, and luckily, I can't plug LISC enough. We had some excellent TA from LISC in putting together this development project. You want to flip to the next one, Cecile? Yep, here's of course, this is a 13-year-old development budget, so the prices look pretty good today. But the building was absolutely not code compliant, and that's one thing I've learned, that childcare is heavily regulated, and the normal things you encounter in a housing development are multiplied by complexity factors of 10 or 20 when you're doing a childcare center. This is a standalone center, so it was all for childcare space, and then the organization had offices on the second floor. I know Cindy loves to push good loans, but as a developer, the more equity and grants and everything I got, the better it was going to be. We did end up with a fairly small loan from LISC, and it was $800,000 or so. And it was good we had LISC as a lender, because going back to our green nature, none of us had done this before. So we had a really patient and cooperative lender. When the project schedule slipped a little bit, we were able to work with them to postpone payments. When our partner was not able to get the enrollment they needed as part of their budget projections, again, we were able to get an extension on being able to pay that debt. All very critical things that you should keep in mind as you start to plan your project. You want to go to the next one? Yeah, so this, after several years of assembling, dealing with all the legal complexities, the environmental complexities, we finished the project. It's very successful. The agency that did this has gone on to be one of the premier childcare providers in the city and in Northern Rhode Island. They've paid off their mortgage. A testament to Bree's comment about how you conceive the project and market it. We called it, on all our official documents, it was all childcare facility, which is pretty boring. Our partner called it the Hope Street Family Center, has a lot more cachet than childcare facility. And I'm sure that was part of their success in really attracting a lot of operating support, capital grants to pay off the mortgage, and to, again, be very, very successful provider. We're so proud of the partnership. We've gone on to do other projects with them. And they just run a top-notch facility, and it's a real important institution in the neighborhood, and has really contributed to the economic prosperity in the neighborhood, because it's a facility right in the heart of where workers are, no longer have to take a bus for an hour to the other side of the city to get quality childcare. I think that's it, Bree. Cecile, yeah. These are just some of the historic features. Little complexity with the National Register designation. It generated a lot of equity for us, $2 million, but they're picky at the Preservation Commission. I knew it was going to be a tough road when, in our initial walkthrough, we were trying to get, you have to have the little kid toilets, everything's at a different scale, and the preservation people were not wild about that. They said, well, maybe this isn't the building for a childcare center, and I just kind of scratched my head, said, my God, this was an elementary school for 100 years. If ever there was a building that was meant to be a childcare center, it is this historic school. We went on to have a lot more negotiations over stuff, and I think we ended up with a good project. But what I thought would be an easy sell turned out to be a lot more difficult than I thought. But anyway, in the end, we got a great project.
Thank you so much, Joe. We are going to collapse our panel and our Q&A together so that we make sure we have a lot of time to hear from all of you and all of the things that you want to bring to the table. So I'm going to just stop sharing my screen for a second. And I am also, just FYI, going to stop this recording and begin a new recording because we're doing this in 2 halves.